turned therapists. Our focus in these episodes is to humanize the athlete experience beyond the lines of their arena. In this podcast, we will explore the whole athlete, highlighting the mental, emotional, and social aspects of their journey.
Hey everyone, today I am joined by Thomas, and we are going to talk a little bit about recovering from an injury. It's not always physical, there's a mental aspect to it too. I know Thomas works with a bunch of athletes who have experienced this. I myself experienced a few injuries, one that was career-ending. So we're just going to have a candid conversation about sports performance and injury and the effect that it can have on an athlete's mental health. Thomas, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Thomas Kalapurakal. I've been working here at Millennium now for the past 2 years. So I work with a diverse range of clients, but primarily the clientele has been UIC and DePaul athletes for the past 2 years. And yes, I have seen a lot of athletes go through significant injuries, and they come to me in terms of dealing with their mental health due to factors that have to do with their injury. So being able to talk to you about this, Lilly, is a great thing, and I hope that people can get something out of it today.
Yeah, exactly. I guess I'll start by just giving a little rundown on why I think this should even be a topic that's discussed about. I definitely have some, some foot in the game. Is that even the saying? I don't know. But yeah, so in high school, I tore my ACL and I missed an entire season. So I missed my entire sophomore season. I was on varsity all 4 years. So that was like, I was trying to prove myself and then got injured. It was rough. I remember the day like it was yesterday. And I was like, oh, can it please not be an ACL? Like you hear like stories, and it's common, especially in female athletes, to tear your ACL. So you hear stories, you hear how grueling the recovery is from a physical aspect. I was not prepared for what then came mentally. I knew that I was going to be able to like put in the work and recover and go to my trainings and do this and do that and like, I don't know, be with my physical therapist. But the aspect mentally, it was just hard to be sidelined from something that you'd been doing for so long and also wanting to stay a part of it as well. I was someone who was always on the floor, never really on the bench. And then for a whole year, I was on the bench. Thankfully, I had coaches that were able to still allow me to feel like a part of the team. I remember one of my coaches made me sit next to him the entire, like not at the end of the bench, but like at the front of the bench. And I kind of like, honestly, in hindsight now, I did not notice this when it was happening, but I think I gained a lot of like my court knowledge from sitting next to a coach and just being able to like take a step back and really watch instead of being on the floor and doing it. Yeah, I know I say all of this because I just was not prepared for any of the mental aspects. And I think it's something that is getting more discussion now, but definitely didn't even a few years ago. Yeah, so you work with a bunch of athletes. What is sort of things that come up for you in talking with people who recently got injured or are recovering from an injury? What sort of things are you seeing with your clients?
Okay. Yeah. So for me specifically, I think one of the main things that I do notice when working with an athlete who has either recently been injured or continues to deal with injury are, I think, 5 main things. The first thing is the emotional distress, right? And when we talk about emotional distress, it's not just the distress that comes with the injury or not playing the sports, but we're also dealing with the trauma that the injury caused initially, right? So for you, Lily, like you say you remember your first injury very
When I
well.
tore my ACL,
Mhm.
I remember the tournament. I remembered
Yes.
the gym.
Yes.
I remembered it was a fall day. I
Absolutely.
remember that I had my homecoming dance the night of.
Oh my gosh.
So I remember all these things. And it was like a last minute tournament. It wasn't even the team that I was supposed to play for. They just like needed another player. And I was like, oh, I'd love to get a few more games in. Like some college coaches were going to be there. I was like, this would be great exposure. Like, why not? I recently actually went back to that gym because I'm now coaching 5th grade girls. And one of the tournaments was at the gym. I sent a picture to my mom right away. I was like, Mom, this is the gym. Like, I got full, like the emotional and like somatic distress that I got when I walked into that gym. Something that I was not necessarily knowing, like did not know that was going to happen. But I was like, oh, this is 110% where it happened. Like it was on the third court. It was on this side. Like I remembered it all. I do think when I actually tore my ACL, like I heard a snap. I like went down, not a big crier. I was sobbing my eyes out. Like I knew right away, couldn't get up and walk. I had to get like lifted off by one of my coaches. Went over to, there was like a training staff at the tournament and they were like, we're pretty sure you just tore your ACL, but would like right off the bat. They're like, you're obviously going to need to go through some MRIs and then there's this whole waiting period. My parents were like terrified to completely tell me that that was what was the actual case. So I was like, can you just spit it out? Like, what happened? Like, what's the recovery look like? So yeah, I guess the first thing is like the initial news of even it's traumatic of itself. Well, the actual event is traumatic because you're like, that's a painful experience. And then just initially like dealing with that news that you're going to have to be out for an extended period of time. It's kind of what every athlete doesn't like wishes doesn't happen to them. So, and I think this plays later when talking about recovery also. It's then you then play timid because of that traumatic event that
Absolutely.
happened. And you're like,
Absolutely.
oh, that kind of felt like how I moved when that happened. And it's just kind of replaying in your head. Definitely had some moments when I was first back on the court when it was like a similar play. And I was like, oh man, like, no, 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 like this cannot happen again. Just like kind of fight or flight, like trying to protect myself. Yeah. So I definitely think the traumatic, like the emotional, like complete and utter like dysregulation that you're feeling right after it happens. You're like, even, yeah, I'm just even thinking like my nervous system was all over the place. I was like sobbing and then I was like happy 1 second because I was like, oh, yay, now I don't have to go to all these practices. And I was like, wait, but I like going to the practices. And it's
Yeah.
just like, whoa, like how am I feeling? A lot of new emotions, especially I was like young, I was a sophomore.
Sophomore in
Yeah.
high school too. So it's just like you're figuring things out for yourself. You're understanding who you are and you're recognizing how much I think at that moment you realize how much your sport, athletics in general just mean to you.
And how much it's connected to who you are to that point.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I think with exactly what you said, one of the most important things someone can do after this injury happens is fully process what happened. That takes a lot of time to get to that point, to like relive that experience, to really think about it, think about what you were going through, but the thought process that you went through. But for a lot of people, talking about what happened, what was going through your mind, how dysregulated you were is something that is challenging initially. But looking back on it and understanding how athletes kind of bounce back, it becomes a part of their story. And it becomes that injury is also a part of their identity when trying to recover as well. So, initially, what I noticed with a lot of clients in general is a range of emotional responses, but you see a lot of frustration, a lot of irritation, sadness, anger, all of these things. And that is like a common response to now not being able to play the sport that you love, the sport that you're so tied to. But I think certain factors that I've noticed are the most damaging for later on are, the disengagement, the dysregulation, as you say, the lack of motivation that comes with the injury and then pushes onwards from that point, right? I've also noticed like with these specific, just the emotional patterns or the emotional responses, you notice like sleep disturbances, which completely impact your cycle as an athlete because sleep, rest, all of that is so important. Changes in appetite, things like that, that really put you in a worse position if it's not discussed or, just recognized at that time. So for you specifically, Lily, when you think about like not just the injury, but that initial period going out of it, out of the things that are on here, what do you feel like were the things that maybe you went through or you significantly remember from that time? Because I think that's also very telling about the injury as well.
Yeah, I think originally it was definitely a bunch of anger and frustration. I'm the youngest in my family, and I have two older siblings and big sports family. We all played sports. My dad played sports. Like I have early memories of like that's just how the Wehmans did it. Like that's just how it went. So originally I went through this whole rabbit, now looking back, very unhelpful thought pattern. But it was like, why did this happen to me? Like, what did I do to deserve this? And then I was just like, why me? Literally, like, actually, that's literally all I was talking about for the first 3 months. I was just like, oh, come on. Like, so that took me a lot to get over. because then comes in that lack of motivation. And you're like, okay, like, if they chose me, like, should I just bow out? Like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And then honestly, sadness. I had 2 injuries, and I feel like sadness was more related to the first one. By the time I got injured the second time, I probably didn't love the sport as much. But sophomore year of high school, had just like finished the freshman season on varsity, like really excited about the future, like had made the decision that I wanted to maybe try to play in college, was on a travel team, hung out with my friends. Like a lot of my best friends were on the team. So I think a part of me was just like, yeah, I mean, I fell into a depression for sure. I was just like, I am so sad. Like something that was so tied to me and something that is also that aspect of like doing something and having it fill up your day to then not having it fill up your day is a lot. Sarah and I spoke about it in the last podcast, but like life after sport, like you have a lot more free time. So when you're injured, it kind of feels like you have more free time too. So yeah, I think general, yeah, sadness and frustration were probably a few of the things that like stand out to me. I think I was thankful and like I have good relationship with my coaches to this day, but I'm like, thanks for making sure I felt like I was still a part of the team. I think the worst thing that you can do is have a coach that like forgets to acknowledge the person that's on the sideline. Like I said, you do still have free time, but like you still are like if you can make the practice, you're gonna be there. You are like your voice can still be heard. You can cheer on your teammates. You can maybe pull a younger kid aside and be like, hey, like I know I'm not out there right now, but I saw XYZ that maybe you could work on. Like I'd love to like do what I can to help you get to that point, whatever. So yeah, I think my coach kind of gave me a role of like still being able to contribute to the team, but like in a more like pull a kid aside and kind of like teach them this is maybe what I would have done. And so honestly becoming a bit more of like a assistant coach role. So I think yeah, the worst thing that you can do is like as a coach and as a teammate of someone who's injured is like disregard them. They're still a part of the team. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've heard so many stories of athletes who are either in the hospital room or anything, and they talk about whether it's their coaches or the specific teammates that were, visited them after that initial injury happened, or even afterwards when they keep checking in on you, how important that is for the person that is injured in recognizing that they do mean so much to the team, that the value comes with the team, right? And I think one thing that you mentioned that I think leads into that lack of motivation is that loss of hope, right? When you think, why me? Or you have that great freshman year and you're leading into that sophomore year, hoping that things are going to be even better. You're going to take that next leap. And in 1 second, all of it just goes away. Immediately, that hope for the future just takes you out of it. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, at these pivotal developmental stages in your life, not just as a human being, but also as the athlete you're trying to become, that time is so sensitive and it has to be catered to in a lot of ways. If not, then we're only exacerbating the feelings of like, irritation, the lack of motivation, isolation, and later on, what that impact can have to the athlete can be extremely detrimental. So, hearing your story and understanding that is just huge because it seems like your team, your coach were people that ultimately had your back through that time. And I hear with stories, with certain clients even now, how they're, after a certain point, the coach, the team, they have to go on.
Yeah, like they're trying to win games. And if you're not on the court, they don't really care. Or yeah.
And that's the reality of the situation,
I mean, a
right?
coach is trying to keep their job. Or
Yes.
like a player is trying to get, if you're in high school, a player is like, all right, well, maybe this is my time to like step up and I want a coach to recognize me or something like that. Like part of it is definitely cutthroat. Yeah,
Absolutely.
people are competitive.
Absolutely. And that ties into the emotional distress that the athlete goes through is that initially there is this wave of support. But after that time, there is that period of like, now what? While I'm recovering, the team goes on, coach goes on, you feel left behind, right? And at that moment, even if they are trying their best to be there for you when they have, or even giving you opportunities, right? You are watching your contemporaries alongside of you develop into what you wanted to do. they're developing into the athletes that you hoped you would develop into. And that also plays into the irritation, frustration, lack of, motivation. And I think that motivation aspect is so key because not only are you gearing up yourself back to get back onto the court, it's also having that hope, having that inner mental strength to get through the recovery and rehab process as well.
I think for me, something that's coming up when you're talking is I had coaches and I had my teammates and I had my physical therapist. That honestly, my physical therapist turned to more of my mental therapist through this time. I hadn't been to therapy. I had no introduction to therapy at this time. Even when I played in college, I graduated a few years ago. When I played in college, there was no mental health professional for athletes in undergrad. But I think I say all of that now, and I also am very happy to have this conversation with you about what I went through because it's so great that people do have people to talk to now,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
awesome. A thing also that popped up for me when talking about motivation, I remember, and I know people always throw this lingo around and some phrases stick with some people and they don't stick with others, but controlling what you can control was a huge thing for me. I would make goals in my recovery process. And when I tore my ACL, I was in a locked brace. You literally cannot move your knee for I think it's 6 weeks or something. I was I had every intention of being winning every sprint at practice. But now I'm in a facility that's not close to my teammates. I'm with an athletic trainer who's telling me small wins, small wins. And I'm I get it, but that only goes so far. So the thing that, I mean, small wins later is now that's something that works for me. But in the moment, the control what you can control was something that I really held on to. I was I'm going to try to show up and be the best person I am in this athletic, physical therapy room that I can be. It looks different than diving on the floor to get a loose ball and show my coach that I'm willing to give it what it takes or do what it takes. So that was something that motivation for me. I was okay, it's going to look different, but I can still give it my all. I can still give what I'm doing or in this moment and the card that I've been dealt with, I'm still going to try my best to succeed in that. Yeah.
Shout out to all the PTs. I know
Yeah.
for so many of my clients that PT figure is so important because they are really seeing that injury development process or the
Yes.
rehab
The
process
ins and outs.
every day or every week or however many times you see them. And there's a bond connected with the PT completely because whereas coaches and as we said, coaches, teammates, they move on. They just see maybe the highlights or the lowlights of certain moments. The PT sees everything in between. And so shout out to you guys because at the end of the day, without them being not just a physical therapist, but a mental therapist in certain ways.
Yeah. After I tore my ACL, I tore my Achilles a few years later. And I remember hunting down my physical therapist. She had moved to a different practice, to a different location that was further away. And I was okay, she doesn't work here, but she's got to work somewhere. I hope she didn't move across the
Yeah.
country or
Oh
something.
my God.
So I
Yeah.
found I think her name was Sarah. Yeah, I still remember her name. Sarah, if you ever listen to this, thank you. But I was just I'm going to go and try to find her. I was I need her to be I want to work with her again. So I think I ended up driving. That was another thing. I drove 30 minutes out of my way to go to where she was working. I think that just kind of proves the point that you were saying. It's a very strong bond that can be created. A lot of time together too.
Yeah, and you don't even realize the safety you feel with someone that does sit with you through those moments, right? As you said, there's not many therapists, there's not any mental help during that time for most high school athletes. So that PT is the person that walks you through that every step of the way. And so that kind of leads me into the next aspect, which is understanding how when you can't play your sport, especially in your situation when, you know, freshman, sophomore, you're in varsity as a freshman and you're going to that time where you're in your sophomore year, you're going to take it to the next level, how that ultimately creates this feeling of loss or the loss of identity that comes with not being able to play your sport. How's that for you?
That's definitely the biggest thing. Honestly, I think I'm still working with it, even now being a retired athlete. You can't see me, but I'm very tall. I'm 6'2". So most people automatically will be all right, what sport do you play? I literally introduce myself to someone on the street and they're Okay, so it's basketball or volleyball. You're so tall. So like right away, my identity is like completely connected to who I am as an athlete. Like I mentioned earlier, my family, very athletic family. I had to work through like expectations of like, she's the youngest Wehman. Like that's just like she's gonna be great. Like no one was shocked that I was on varsity as a freshman. They're like, that's just sort of like what it was supposed to happen. So I had like those pressures as well. So yeah, I think for a while I fully believed that like I was Lilly the basketball player and like that was really all I had to offer. Like I definitely fully believed that. So having that and then not being able to play for a whole year, it's like, oh, like so what am I going to do now? Everyone was thinking that I was going to be like XYZ, maybe like announcing where I was going to be going to school and like all of this and that was just not the path that I was on. Yeah, so I think like finding, and we even spoke about this on the Lost podcast too, but like finding other things that you enjoy is a huge thing. I know you spend so much of your time like trying to get to this point, and a lot of it for me like was basketball. Like I think I was playing on like 3 teams at one point, and like every day after school I was going. And I love that. Like I do loved it. I like loved it, and I still like looking back, I'm like that's what I wanted to do. Like I felt very connected to that. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was like friends also. Like you can just go and like be Lily and be like a silly, goofy sophomore in high school, like with my friends and doing stuff outside of the sport. I think also like going and being a fan of another sport. Like I would love to, or like the new identity that I kind of took was like assistant coach vibe or like what was it or like I'm going to be your number one fan. Like I had never really, like I said, I'd never really been someone who was able to like really be there and cheer on from the sidelines because I felt like I was always sort of on the floor. So taking that role and being like, okay, I'm going to try. I think that sophomore year, I like came up with a bunch of different cheers that we would do or
That's
something. Or
awesome.
like
Yeah.
when someone was shooting a free throw, it would be like 1 clap if they make it, 2, whatever, like stuff like that. Like
Yeah.
it's like sounds silly now, but like in that moment, it's like, oh, like I'm going to be on top of it this game. Like we're taking stats. Like there's other things that you can do to still like feel a part of the team. Yeah, but identity is definitely a huge thing for sure. It's very tied. It's very deep. It's like very connected. I mean, to this day, I feel like I've been talking about my family a bunch, which is maybe saying some things, but to this day, I'm 24 and my dad will be like, this is my 6'2" basketball playing daughter. I'm like, Dad, like that's not what I do anymore. So even now I'm like I'm a therapist now. Like I've all this stuff. So like, but at the same time, like I love that part of me too. And I'm super happy that I was like, and I think once an athlete, you kind of always identify as an athlete as well, whether it's like you do take up different physical activities now later in life, or it's just like the attitude and the motivation that you bring to whatever you're doing.
And it's so interesting to see that even though the athletic career didn't pan out, it's how you've worked around it and become something to support other athletes, not just like you, but in different situations and to help and support them. So, like, even during those times when athletes can feel that loss of hope, that feeling that the sport's not there for them anymore, or their ability to play is being diminished with every injury, we can always turn that around for the better, right? And it's not something that you may want to hear at that time at
Yeah.
all, but it is about recognizing that your experience is going to mean something and your experience can assist other people. And that doesn't just involve a sports injury. That's for anything and everyone, right? And we recognize that in other aspects of life when, let's say, one person goes through depression and then speaks about their depression and helps someone else. But it's the same thing with athletes. But I think because of the hope and that feeling of like I had this much potential and I, didn't live up to it, right? That sense of dread that comes through them is such, once again, it's a very sensitive process to handle. And I think it's so important during that time, whether or not the athlete wants to, there is someone talking to them about these things. Because as you continue to process and talk about these things, they realize what it is that they want for themselves, whether it is to push forward headstrong or if it is to take a step back and be like, I'm not ready to take that next step. Because in your mind, there is a timeline for everything. There is a feeling that I need to get back by a certain time. But sometimes if you're not yet ready for that mentally, it doesn't align with the body,
Yep.
and physically you're not going to move forward. So these processes, if anyone is hearing or knows athletes that are going through this, understand that these processes have to be dealt with a lot of care, and it cannot be something that's brushed aside for the sake of physical rehab or for the sake of just rushing back onto the team, because that doesn't help neither the team nor yourself, right? So having that greater outlook on it and recognizing that these processes have to be taken very gently, and they need to have that space to process what every day could mean to them during that time. So absolutely, when I'm hearing your experience, it's like so many of my clients go through that same thing where it's like, if there is no volleyball, if there is no soccer, if there is no basketball, who is it that I am? What is it that I can do for not only the sport that I love, but the team that I care for, the coaches that I love, you know, and feeling that sense of worth within them is such a hard thing. So having the ability to talk and process through that is very important. And for you specifically, Lily, this kind of goes on to the next aspect, right? When being sidelined and kind of not in the mix while your teammates are going on, right? This is the next aspect of that, injury recovery period where you're recognizing that people are moving on. People are moving forward. And, initially they're there for you. Initially they're comforting you. But as you continue your personal rehab, you will feel a sense of being left behind because the team continues to play. The coach has to continue on. For you, when you recognize, like, oh man, I am alone now, because initially, as we said, there is that period of comfort. And then after a while, the comfort slowly dries out because everyone moves on. How did you handle, dealing with just that feeling of maybe being left behind, even though they're not literally leaving you behind, but just seeing them from the sideline, knowing that I could be there and I could be developing with them right now? How was that for you?
I don't know if this is the answer that people are going to really imagine, but everyone kind of processes things differently. But for me, it was weirdly like motivating because I was like, okay, but like I know I can get to that point. Like I'm just going to have to dig a little deeper. Like it was kind of that like relentless grind. I was like, okay. And it wasn't, I mean, a competitive nature too. Like I was like, all right, like they may have a year on me now, but like I'm getting stronger every single day. And once I'm cleared to play, like I'm going to put in the work. I think, and we talk about, and you mentioned it and sort of like hinted to it earlier, there's also a part of me that's like, I don't want to say automatically you deal with a like injury and your initial response needs to be, I need to get to the point where I was or better. Like you automatically need to return to sport. Like you can take in that time of processing, you can be like, wait, like maybe that wasn't serving me. Like I feel like in athletes, and I catch myself doing this too, it's always like you need to get back to the point where
Yes.
you were, or
Mhm.
you're like even better than that. And ultimately, when I decided to stop playing a few years later, that decision was like so hard, probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make. But I also, for anyone like listening, want to point out that like if an injury is kind of what leads you off to maybe starting to like wonder if this is even for you, because maybe it was something that you were doing because it was like super fun and you were meeting a bunch of friends and like something that you did when you were younger, but you get to a point where it's like, oh, like this is not feeling too great. And like the pressures become like, I don't know. I just basically want to like, we can like open that can of worms later, but essentially be like, just because you're injured doesn't mean it's like, okay, now it's like whatever you are going to do, whatever it takes to get that back to that point. If that's not something that feels aligned with what you want, it doesn't need to be the route that you go. Sorry, that was a little side tangent.
No.
But yeah, the feeling left behind. Yeah, I feel like for me, it was like motivation, but I can definitely remember friends who would be like, oh man, like they leave me behind, like leave me here. Like I'm good.
Absolutely.
Like leave me here. Like if this is my way to sneak out of this, like I'll sneak out of it. But yeah, I think also there's an aspect of like, you don't necessarily, this is something that I kind of responded with is like, I didn't need to wait for people to come to me.
Yes.
Like I could, like, and it's hard because you're sad and you're
Yes.
frustrated and you're tired
Absolutely.
and you're
Oh my
angry.
gosh.
But it's kind of like, okay, but I also am recognizing that it's mid season. I've been there before. I know they're also tired. but like I can go try to like reconnect and be like, I see it. And not use like, hey, I'm on the sideline and like do it for me because like I can't do it. Cause that can kind of become a little like toxic. Like, do it because I can't. Like, I don't know if I love that language, but just being like, I know you're tired and like I'm tired too, but like just going and reconnecting with like the people on your team, I think is something that I was able to do. And like you can be in a wave of depression and you can be like, no one's coming out for me. Like everyone's forgetting about me, but kind of like taking a step back and realizing and like putting yourself in other people's shoes, like they're just going on. Like they're doing exactly what they should be doing at that time. And like them worrying about you is not necessarily on top of mind. But there's also a part of me that was like, I can't really take that personally.
Absolutely. And I think that your response is so like, it's so mature, right? At the end of the day, because I think for so many, it's that feeling of everyone is going on. And, as you said, right, there is that feeling of you want people to come to you, right? But you also realize that they have a life and they have to, go on with their life, manage all of this, and then making time for you at the end of the day, or even with the little time they have, it can seem like, asking for that is a burden, right? Or you're putting more on the athletes or your teammates more than you want to. And I've noticed that because every time, and as you're saying, right, reconnecting with your teammates is just so important, even if it is not talking about the sport or just being with them.
Yeah, I literally can be like, do you want to go grab something to eat after
Yes,
practice?
it's
Like
as simple
something
as
like
that.
that. Like
Yeah,
just because I'm on crutches, I can crutch my way to the like in
right.
the cafeteria and we can grab food, you know?
The team you're on, they don't define the team. It's the people you're with, right? And how they made you feel as if you're part of the team. So doing just that, getting food, just hanging out with them, doing those things are something that I promote all the time because it reestablishes that feeling of camaraderie that I'm still part of the team when I'm feeling my lowest or when I feel like I don't want to be around anyone. And I think what I see so much with my current clients now is that people are college students, they have college level academics to handle, they have college level athletics and all this to manage, and I'm just sad all the time. I'm just really sad, and I don't think anyone wants to hear this when they have so much to handle. And in reality, right, what I think I've noticed with others is that hearing or just being around them is good enough, right? I totally get that feeling of you don't want to like bomb them with the emotions that you're going through all the time. But at the same time, we're not asking you to do that. It's just being there with them and noticing that they can provide, whether it is instruction or help or even just hearing you out about how these games have been, things that have been talking about those things just allow you to get reestablished within the team environment. And it's so important that even if you are sad, you give yourself maybe a challenge of doing it once a week or even twice a week, depending on how much time you have and how you feel, so that you do reestablish that sense of camaraderie, team, all of those things. And the more you push that off, the more we notice with certain clients that it leads them into this point of isolation, depression, and feeling like no one cares. So we want to push that off. But from that point, right, that social isolation point can then go to the self esteem, right? And now you're seeing as they isolate, as they push themselves away, there's this sense of, can I do this anymore? Am I good enough to do this? Am I good enough to be like what I'm seeing right now? Because I can't do that, right? So I think like so many athletes feel less competent and capable during that specific recovery period because especially if they're unable to train or compete, they tell themselves, am I good enough? So like for you specifically, Lily, did you recognize that even as you're recovering, even after you're kind of taking the steps that you need to bounce back to where you needed to be? What was the self-esteem like for you specifically?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I want to point out that like some days I'm like, I can do this. I will be great. Like I had all the motivation in the world. I was like, I am like gonna bust my butt every day in physical therapy and I'm gonna come back better than ever. And then complete 180 the next day. Oh my gosh, there is no way that I can do this. Like you have one, like something sets you off and you're like, oh, I can't even believe that I thought that this was possible yesterday. Which that in and of itself, the like roller coaster of emotions is a lot to deal with because you're like, whoa, like what am I even believing? Like, am I even making sense right now? Like you kind of get in your head. I think especially when returning to sport, I was like, who told me that I could do this? Like I just started to like question and doubt everything. And that was something that I think took a lot of time. I think also this is another like cliche that I used to hate hearing, but now when talking about it, it seems like it makes a lot of sense. Recognizing that it's a process and you're going to have like some days where you feel on top of the world and other days when you literally want to throw in the towel and like quit your sport, like that range of emotions. But yeah, the self esteem was definitely, I don't know, I would try to remind myself of times I try to remind myself of, like, who I was. I was like, there were times when I was really good at this, and, like, just right now because I physically, like, look down and, like, do not believe that I can do what my peers are doing. Like, but there was a time when I was able to do that. Then also reaching out, I think something that helped, looking for people rather, like, in your community or, like, professional athletes who have experienced a similar injury and then kind of like seeing where they are now and being able to like have proof of that was something that was super helpful. This is so funny, but Derrick Rose tore his ACL like
Yeah.
very similar time as when I did.
No way.
Yeah, and I am born and raised in Chicago,
Yes,
huge Bulls fan.
absolutely.
When the Bulls were like sort of good with Derrick Rose on the team, but he had like all those multiple knee injuries. He came out with like a Netflix thing. It was called like The Return. I know this like the back of my hand.
Yeah.
I still watch
I
it sometimes.
remember. I
Yeah.
remember that. Wow.
And then my family like started to use, they were like, it's the return for Lilly. Like we were like hashtag the return. Like we were making it a whole thing. And like, yeah, for sometimes I was like, ooh, that's a lot of pressure. But other times I was like, no, like I can do it. Like, sure, he's a professional athlete and he's like amazing and has the top care and all of this, but like I can do that too. Like so recognizing that there are people that have sort of like paved the way. I do think there were a few people in my high school who had similar injuries that reached out to me. Now, I mean, obviously, I feel like I can hopefully be helpful in this line of work. But like now, if I know anyone who I like in my circle who I hear about if they tore their ACL or a similar injury, I always like reach out and shoot them a text because I'm just like, I was there and like, I understand that you may feel like completely lost, hopeless, don't even know like what to do anymore. So yeah, I think self-esteem, I don't even know if this is fully connecting to your
No,
question,
it is. It is.
but yeah, just seeing that it's like been done before and there's proof in the work, I guess. Yeah.
For you, when did maybe that, not even getting back to where you were prior to injury, but along the lines of this recovery process, when did you feel like, okay, I feel like I'm back? When was it for you? Because it's different for a lot of people, but
Yeah, I don't want this to scare people off, but it was probably like a 2-year process,
absolutely.
honestly.
No, that's
Yeah.
the reality of the situation.
Yeah. I think an ACL recovery, like on paper, is I think like 6 months, maybe. I don't really know. I can't. Another thing, I think I blocked out a lot of things that happened during this
Absolutely. I
process as
can
well. So I'm
imagine.
sure there's tons of things that happened that I don't even remember because I was just in like preservation mode. But yeah, I think I gave myself extra grace with like fully returning back to like going live and like playing full on. I think I didn't do that until like 9 months because I kind of just I felt like my body needed that time. Spoke about it earlier, but I was definitely playing like timid and I was afraid of getting injured again. Check out our blog post if you want to learn more about
Yes,
that.
please do.
But my coaches and my PT and my doctor, like I got cleared on every single level. They were like, you're good to go. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like I need 3 more months. Like I do not feel ready to go. So yeah, again, recognizing that it's different for everyone and it's a process. There is an aspect where you do kind of need to push yourself, I think, because if you keep yourself like in that bubble, like sometimes you kind of got to get a little uncomfortable and be like, well, if I keep pushing this off, then maybe it's never going to happen. So I do remember like the first time I like fully, I think the first time I remember the first time I like sprinted on the treadmill, which was like crazy to think like when that first happened, I was like, I'm never going to be able to do this ever again. And like 6 months later, I'm like running perfectly and it's so fine. But the mind component there, I was like, oh my goodness, like, and then you kind of you're like, am I actually feeling pain or is it like my mind telling me that I'm feeling pain? then you just get so used to like going home and icing that you just like ice even if you aren't feeling pain. And then it's like, what is this now? I'm like, what was I doing psychologically? Like, I didn't even know. But yeah, I think overall it took a while. And yeah, just reminding that your mind may be like a few steps behind your body is something that sort of came up for me. I definitely think I could have benefited from talking to someone and having time to process that. But like I said, like I have a great relationship with my coach and we had a great conversation and he would always check in with me like where I was. Even when I did recover, he was like, all right, you've been playing for a few weeks, but you are not yourself. Like, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, could you really notice? Like, and he was like, you look good, but like, I can tell there's something else going on. And I'm like, oh, and at that moment, I'm like, thank you for noticing. Cause I was like, I wasn't at the point where I was ready to acknowledge that myself.
So that leads to the next thing, which is that, and I want to repeat what Lily said, which is it took her 2 years to feel like she was back, right? The rehab process could have been 6 months, it could have been 7 months, it could have been 4 months, but to feel like you're back, it will take a much longer time depending on how this process is handled. And that leads to this next part, which you were just talking about, which is the fear and anxiety part, which is the most important part because just because your body's ready, it doesn't mean your mind is there yet. It doesn't mean that the fear of making that same mistake can happen, right? It's not like, you tell someone to jump off your bed or something like
Yeah,
that, right?
exactly.
Where you can be like, no, I'm not going to do that. This injury happened in a split second. You probably don't even know what caused or what movement caused that to happen, right? So in your mind, you're constantly fearing like if I make the wrong step, it's going to happen again or something worse could happen. And once again, this is a sensitive period for athletes where I think even more than therapists or physical therapists, this is the importance of where coaches, trainers, and teammates come in, right? Because they're the ones that'll point out to you, like, oh, you're doing everything great, but where's like the Lily we knew, or where's that Lily that we saw before? And you're thinking, I've recovered physically, I'm here. But as you hear things like that, you recognize, like, oh, am I playing a little bit safer? Am I not maybe taking that extra leap that I would take before? And those are aspects that also need to be heavily processed, right? Recognizing that the fear and anxiety of re injuring myself is a process that takes so long for people to overcome. And it's almost like as if you will need so much evidence to really show yourself, like, okay, I'm over it. But it's one thing for other people to say it, and it's another thing for you to feel it, right? For you specifically, when did you feel like that maybe that fear or anxiety is kind of dwindling away or not even gone, right? But just it's not as much of a fear or anxiety provoking thought for you.
Trying to remember. There was like, again, this didn't necessarily come. I think I needed help of others to get to this moment for sure. Like, I didn't know if I could sort of like conjure it up in myself to like make it happen. But there was like one game when my dad was like, you're good, right? He was like, you're back. Like, I can tell. And I was like, you know what? Like, yeah, I think I am. I actually remember that. I haven't thought about that in forever, but like a car ride with my dad. And it was literally just like, you're good. Like, you're back. You got this. And then I was like, you know what? Like, I do. And then from there on, actually, that was like my first introduction to like positive self talk and like mantra type stuff. I was like, I got this. Like, that's kind of like my thing. I'm not wearing it, but I have a bracelet that says, you got this. But it's like my thing. And yeah, kind of just like recognizing, I think it was just like allowing yourself to like play freely and like, I don't know. I just like noticed I felt like lighter. I was just like, okay, I'm back in my flow. I was having fun, which is like a thing that people forget that this is also really about having fun. Or like you have a good play and like your coach calls a timeout, but you're all like screaming and jumping around together and you like look to your friend and you're like, this is so fun. The fans are screaming. Like you kind of just remember the joy that it all like brought you. It's kind of, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of just like, yeah, I think it's going to be different. Again, going to be different for everyone. But I do kind of feel like once you have that moment of like essentially like closure, or you're just like, you're capable, like you can do this. It's sort of like, all right, like let me go. Like I got this now. That's sort of how it went for me, I think.
And I think one other aspect to add on to that is like the fear and anxiety of re-injury is one thing, but also the anxiety of recognizing that I need to be back at a certain level, or I need to be where I need to be, holds you back from really going through that process the way you need to, right? As you said, the fun needs to be back. That love for the sport needs to be back. And all we think about as injured athletes sometimes is that, can I just do this again? Can I be a part of this high level varsity team that I'm on, or high level collegiate team that I'm on? The idea of that, or I'm having fun, only comes with repeated exposure to the game or being back in game level environments to ultimately feel that, sense of fun, that sense of, I love this game and this is why I love this game. That love is kind of pushed to the backside because you don't even remember what it feels like to feel that anymore, right? And so having that experience and then having your dad kind of, just repeat it back to you, and it doesn't even hit your mind like, oh my God, yeah, I am feeling this again. I am going back to that. So having people close to you who see you go through it, who just recognize and understand you, may see that more than you will because of that anxiousness in your mind. They may not, as the person going through it, you may not really recognize that, I am playing in a more lighthearted way, or I'm not playing with that fear. All you're telling yourself is, I just need to do this, do it, do it, do it, do it. And when that comes in the way, that can put you in a position to only look at yourself in a like objective way. The subjective nature of having fun, loving the sport is all pushed to the side. And it's important that as they come back, right? When that fear and anxiety hits of re-injury and all of that, it's important that we prioritize that they just feel good on court. I just feel like I'm nimble again. I feel like the injury is not holding me back. I feel that I'm happy playing the sport again. Those are things that I think really need to be established when you notice the athlete ultimately going through that anxious period, that fear period. And, once again, being sensitive with these processes, giving yourself time, grace to work through that is so important. And so, yeah, I think those are like the five main responses that I notice when, an athlete is injured and as they're going through the process, these are the things that you recognize. So as a recap, there's emotional distress, there is the loss of identity that could lead to potential social isolation, which is another one. And when you isolate, there is that feeling of decreased self-esteem of whether I can do this again or not do this again. But as you push on, right, you may feel better here and there. But ultimately, as you are getting back on court, we have to be aware of that anxiety, that fear that plays such a role in how you play and how you feel on court. And working through these periods step by step is so important. So I hope if anyone hears this, that an athlete that's going through this, you can really help them recognize to take these things slow, because we want longevity at the end of the day. We want you to be able to love your sport no matter what at the end of the day. And being realistic with the goals you have in front of yourself is so important. So,
yay. Thanks for joining us, Thomas.
Thank
this
you
was
so
great.
much,
I have a
Lilly.
feeling we'll probably be back talking more about stuff. I felt like this was awesome.